Up next, it's our pleasure to have two gentlemen from Solbridge Energy Advisors, Greg Winks and Will Brown.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you all for having us today. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Will Brown. This is Greg Winks. We had the opportunity to drop into one of the meetings last winter, and it was a really exciting time. And so we're excited to be here celebrating the work that you've all done and the opportunities ahead. So thank you for having us. So today we'd like to talk about solar and renewable energy opportunities in rural America, in Indiana County, kind of the state of the industry, and try and paint a big picture and also kind of share some resources for you all to follow up on. Before we get into those details, we'll give you a bit of context on what we do. Soulbridge is a consulting and brokerage firm. We specialize in solar. So we do not install, sell, distribute solar equipment. Instead, we do consulting and actually represent end users, so homeowners, business owners, nonprofits, municipalities, et cetera, to the broader marketplace for solar installations. Throughout that process, and in addition to that, we do feasibility studies and just general consulting. But our goal in the marketplace is really to act as a broad resource hub for consumers. So one other thing to mention, and Ms. Rhodes did mention context matters. We think locally context matters, and we have some unique components of this region that do present some challenges for renewables and for solar, but we think also represent some opportunities for taking a different approach and maybe taking the lead in some of these areas when it comes to renewables and to solar. So just as a show of hands, does anyone in the audience have solar on their home, on their business? Nice. Good group. How about, does anybody plan on getting solar in the next, say, year or two? Anyone who's in the process? Okay. Anyone who doesn't believe that solar works in Pennsylvania? I guess we're done.
The slide is not.
No, so the reality is, and I'm sure you're all aware that yes, solar is viable in Pennsylvania, in America, pretty much all of North America. There's a lot of disbelief, misconceptions that there's too much clouds, there's too much shade. It does work. Like I said, there are some challenges, but as you can see by the statistic on the right, the sun is quite an abundant source of energy. It's probably the Earth's largest source of energy. We just might not be using it as much as we could. So getting into kind of the state of the marketplace.
A little bit of the history and where we stand right now. We've seen, we're very lucky and fortunate to be in this region where we're in the middle of abundancy of resources. We've seen where oil had its start here. Commercial nuclear power plant, the first one in Shippensport. We have a coal power generation plant here in Homer City. The resources from Marcellus Shale and natural gas. And now what we're starting to see is the introduction of renewable energy, wind, solar, throughout this region, throughout the state. Throughout the state, we have a little over 21,000 solar installations. Both sides, the east and west side of the state, are dominating right now. Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is the number one county as far as number of installations, a little over 2,200. Bucks County in the east is just right behind us. Indiana County, understandably, has been slow, a little lagging behind, but I don't view that as a negative. We view that in the context, even as we're here today and as everyone is here today, as an opportunity for growth. And that's where we're here to talk some more.
Just a note on accessibility in the region. We've seen more and more solar being deployed in ways that it previously was not possible. One example is a project that we worked on in Pittsburgh with a church, St. Paul's Episcopal Church. This is something that probably would not have been really all that viable, say 5 years ago. The cost of equipment coming down and new opportunities for financing, for structuring, possible agreements like power purchase agreements are making solar a lot more accessible to entities like nonprofits.
So nationwide right now, what we've seen over the last 10 years is an annual growth rate that far exceeds the economy, 50, 60% growth rate annually. We have enough solar installed nationwide now to provide power for over 12 million homes. And basically, every 100 seconds, we see a new installation going up. Nationwide, we're employing over 240,000 Americans directly in the industry. Go down to the state level. I mentioned some about the success of the number of installations that we already have in place. We're generally at a 10% growth rate job-wise in the industry statewide, employing over 4,200 people in the industry. And right now, 420 megawatts of solar installed, which equates to 51,000 homes. And one other key factor here that you see on this screen here, which is very important. Pennsylvania is one of over 24 states right now where the cost of solar energy is the same as the cost or less than the cost of what you purchase from your utility.
So one more example, I'm apparently not very adept with the clicker here, is a municipal project, again in Pittsburgh. Some of you may be familiar with Forest Hills Borough. Oh, we're skipping around. Forest Hills just built a new municipal building and installed a roughly 100 kilowatt system on their municipal building, financed it through a power purchase agreement. Just another example of accessibility in places that have challenges. The market is really doing a pretty good job of addressing those. So getting into some of the reasons why this is becoming more feasible, policies and incentives play a huge role in solar viability, especially in this state and in some cases even more so nationwide. The probably single biggest component is the federal tax credit. The federal government offers a 30% tax credit. It's basically like a 30% rebate, cash in your pocket, assuming you have the tax liability in the first year of owning a solar array. This is for everyone, residential, commercial, nonprofits. It can be a little more challenging because they don't have tax liability, but we'll get into some of the strategies used to address that in a little bit. On top of that, solar renewable energy credits. SRECs don't play a huge role in Pennsylvania. They do represent an additional source of income for solar. You look at some other regions like Washington, D.C., where SRECs are worth $300 a piece. Here, they're more like 30. So that's an opportunity for growth in the state. It does play a role, but not a huge one. Net metering is something that Pennsylvania is actually pretty progressive on. We have one of the better net metering policies in the country. And that essentially dictates how utility companies interface with energy producing entities. So that allows you to put power back onto the grid, get credit for it regardless of when you use it. It's a credit system in Pennsylvania. It's pretty favorable. Business depreciation for commercial projects. This is roughly equivalent in value, assuming you have good tax liability to the federal tax credit. You can depreciate 100% of a commercial solar asset in the first year of ownership. So that represents a pretty big cash flow in year one. Lastly, third-party financing, and this, again, we'll get into a little bit. Third-party financing is something that is allowed in Pennsylvania. It facilitates the use of power purchase agreements, kind of opens the door for some innovative financing strategies, and again contributes to that accessibility that I mentioned earlier.
Overall, the policies that we see listed up here are a strong platform for development. However, as a state, we still lag behind compared to other states surrounding us. Maryland, New Jersey, New York are all strong proponents of reaching renewable energy goals of 50% or greater within the next 10 to 20 years. The requirement in the generation portfolio right now by the state for solar energy is 0.5%. So there's not a whole lot of motivation right now coming from the Harrisburg to drive the growth. But at the same time, what we see is good. There can be a lot more. One of the things that's falling under net metering laws is the ability to do virtual net metering that would open up community solar. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that's something that's not allowed right now. But that community solar would allow for people that couldn't normally go solar, renters, homeowners that live in a home that have a tremendous amount of shade precluding any solar capabilities. People that live in townhomes or where homeowners associations right now restrict it. So community solar would allow you to invest into a solar array that's off-site somewhere that you would reap the same benefits as if it was on top of your home or business. An example of the adoption on the commercial end is a Get-Go, which is the convenience store gas stations by Giant Eagle. This is one in the Pittsburgh market on a commercial application. The benefits, what are we getting out of this for going solar? From an economic perspective, it's a matter of taking charge, owning, controlling your own energy cost and what you're getting out of your energy sourcing. It's right either in your backyard or on your rooftop. Maybe like I said, you're subscribing to a solar farm down the road. It is a means of saving money long-term. Going solar is a long-term strategy for managing your electricity cost. It is a means of taking what you have as a monthly expense and investing into an asset you now own and you now control. Typically, when you invest in that asset, that is reducing your cost of living in your business or in your home, it is adding value. So it is adding value to the real estate.
So in addition to the bottom line, and for many of us in this room, health and environment probably play into the bottom line. In reality, they certainly do. But the health benefits and social benefits of solar cannot be overstated. First and foremost, energy security, energy independence. This is something that is talked about more and more these days on a national level. On a local level, there's definitely a value to having distributed generation, having your energy source here, not affected by fluctuating markets or international relations. It just makes sense, and there's a security aspect to it as well. In addition, obviously the environmental impact is pretty significant. I'm sure a lot of you buy clean energy on your electric bill. That type of commitment is good because it supports the market at large. But when we talk about local impacts, you really want to be seeing local clean energy generation. And that's where you see the environmental benefits like cleaner air, cleaner water, a healthier environment. On top of that, community health. When you bring solar to a community, regardless of where that community is economically, if you can bring something like this that demonstrates a forward-thinking approach, that demonstrates a long-term priority for making a healthy community and a resilient community and economic climate, it attracts prospective homeowners, it attracts prospective businesses. It really kind of bolsters all the things that community already has going for it. and shows that the people in power are making decisions for the long term. So long-term economic leadership, it's a good way of demonstrating that. So we like to say this a lot. It's not a question of if, but rather when communities, homeowners, business owners will take these steps and realize the benefits. Right now we're really kind of at the precipice. Obviously, we haven't seen, especially locally when you get outside of Allegheny County, a ton of development here in this space, but it's only a matter of time. Another example in Pittsburgh, I spend, several days a week parking my car and riding my bike away from these solar canopies at the Frick Environmental Center. This is a huge educational opportunity. You see kids and adults alike engaging with this big, interesting thing, learning about solar energy, learning about conservation, sustainability, resilience, all the principles that we're talking about. It's a really good demonstration of that, and it's a really good optics piece to look at and recognize and teach people and learn. And like I said, it's not just kids, it's adults who are fascinated by these things.
So when we look at solar in rural America, Indiana County, what can be accomplished? One thing I do want to acknowledge while we're up here is what already is happening in Indiana County. I know that there's been a solar co-op. Nicholas was talking about some of the activity that's going on already, the initiatives. There's a lot of benefits that could occur within the county that provide stability, resiliency to your power grid, to existing power grid. A lot of times when you get into rural settings, you're living on the edge of certain power grids, strings, and having solar out there adds to the stability of the grid. Diversification of an energy portfolio for electric co-ops that provides cleaner energy options for generation for the sourcing, provides stability in long-term pricing for its customer base. It provides localized, just as in for a public utility. You have solar farms that are situated in a rural setting. It can provide local power sources that you would reduce the demand on transmission and distribution infrastructure. The many scales, one of the beauties of solar, it is scalable. So you can apply this on smaller size, going from residential to small business, larger manufacturing, municipal properties, all the way to farms, and even, like I said, it's larger scale, whether it's vacant land, farmland, that can help for a variety of reasons. Small, mid-scale, supporting farm operations, helping to manage costs long term. Larger scale opportunities. You can look at this in many ways and how it can stimulate economic development. Economic development in jobs for these constructions of solar projects. Economic development in the fact that it could be a large-scale solar farm that is offering affordable energy that a manufacturer or a business or an institution, university, hospital could subscribe and buy the energy from this large-scale solar farm and lock in their energy rates for 10, 20, 25 years, reducing their operating cost for their business or their institution. What does that do? That frees up money for other economic opportunities for that institution or that business. Investment into their business, investment into new jobs. And of course, when you come into all of this, you're increasing tax revenue, tax base as well. Simple application of solar on Frankfurt Farms at their grain mill This is over in Saxonburg, just west of here. Just a great illustration of how it can be applied on site.
So to get a little bit more in depth about opportunities for solar and agriculture, by the way, we have a blog post on this from our website from August, so feel free to check it out. It goes more in depth on this, but there really is a synergy between solar and farmland. In the same sense that farms take energy from the sun, convert it into food that we use to feed ourselves. Solar panels take energy from the sun, convert it into electricity to power, our lives. There are some advantages to solar, and there's really kind of a really good complement here. For one thing, solar is very low maintenance. It doesn't require irrigation. It also doesn't require fertile land. It doesn't require harvesting. It harvests itself all the time. So it's kind of a neat, low maintenance way to use open space that may otherwise not be quite as viable for crops. It's also something that can generate really significant income. Again, in areas where, or on certain plots of lands where there are soil issues or slope, difficulty managing crops, solar can be a solution that really brings a reliable income source long term to that space. Obviously, solar is unaffected by drought and changing weather. It also, and there's been some talk about this, it can provide valuable shade for feedlots, for pollinator species and native species habitats. That's something that's also kind of a budding conversation in the industry, is what kind of native species can be planted with solar, and what kind of grazing animals can coexist peacefully without chewing through conduit. So lastly, looking at kind of the overall trajectory of land ownership and farms, for a farm that might be struggling financially or not wanting to buy into the corporate farming structure, solar can help generate a reliable income source and keep that farm in the family. So after 20-25 years, those solar panels are removed, and you have land that's in many cases more fertile than it was at the start of that land lease. So you maintain ownership and you actually improve the quality of the soil. So coming back down to kind of the smaller scale, looking at the process. This is just a general process for going solar. We have our process, but it doesn't really differ on the individual level for a homeowner, landowner looking to serve their own needs, or a business owner. The first step is looking at the potential. So, you have rooftops, you have vacant lands. You really want to consider all of your options when it comes to that, so that you know that you're, making the most effective decision given your needs. You also want to look at how much electricity do you use. What's your personal demand? That might change over time, especially with the electrification of our transportation infrastructure. Lastly, financial capabilities. Again, there are some financing strategies that are becoming more and more applicable and accessible, and those are something to consider. Once you have a potential solar system designed, you look at the production of that solar array. You look at the value of that energy, and with those bits of information, you can make a financial projection for the next couple decades. It's generally pretty reliable how much solar energy you can produce with a given solar array. The cost of grid electricity is a big variable. So that's something that also goes into that equation. Lastly, our process includes a comparison spreadsheet. We look at all the different options. Some of you might be familiar with Energy Sage, a website that does a similar thing. It's good to get multiple bids for a solar project. It's good to know what your options are in the marketplace, And ultimately, when you get to the point of installation, know that you considered all of those options. So lastly, on the process, just a bit on financing. There are a few basic approaches to financing. First off, cash is king. If you can afford to pay for a system with a lump sum of cash, you're going to get the most long-term value. You can take advantage of the federal tax credit. Under this circumstance, same with a loan, that system adds value to your property because you own it. With a cash purchase, the system pays for itself over time. With a loan, you can kind of manage cash flows, especially with a commercial project. You can be cash flow positive over 25 years and never actually go in the red to put solar on a commercial setting. Lastly, we talked a bit about power purchase agreements. Some or most of you may be familiar with this structure. There's no upfront cost. The system is owned by a third party, which allows that third party to take advantage of those tax credits and tax advantages. And then essentially what happens is they sell you the electricity that's produced, generally at a slightly lower rate than what you were already paying. You do get the price protection and long-term reliability there. Long-term ownership is possible. It's an option. It's built into a lot of PPA contracts, but you don't get to capture the tax advantage yourself, and you don't necessarily get quite the same long-term value that immediate ownership can achieve.
I know Molly was talking about, we just have a minute or two left here. So just want to maybe not spend too much time on this slide here, other than to say that these are some critical areas where municipalities will need to focus as solar starts to become more and more prevalent in the county, and some of the resources that you can turn to, and you've already reached out to SoulSmart and working with them. So we applaud you for that. Any brief, quick questions?
What is the lifetime of the panels, and where are we on the storage battery situation?
Yeah, so commodity solar panels these days are pretty much across the board warranted at least 25 years. In this climate, they can last closer to 35 years, maybe even more. Battery storage is, again, kind of a budding technology, and especially when it comes to affordability, we're just getting there. In this market, with the net metering policies that we have in place, the justification for batteries is more from an energy backup, like a security and reliability standpoint. You're not going to see an ROI from batteries due to demand response or billing, because we don't have those billing structures here.
Yeah, right, it's right there.
Yeah,
Right there. Sure.
Do you have any information on the environmental impact of getting the materials that are needed to manufacture the panels and the overall industry itself? Because this is an argument that we face versus all the methods that have been changed in the production of gas and so forth, and comparatively. So, do you have any information about that?
Certainly, there is a carbon footprint associated with the materials and the manufacturing of the components with any solar array. National studies have shown that the production of the clean energy offsets that carbon footprint within 2 to 3 years of its existence of a solar array.
What about the impact on the area where these minerals and so forth, or metals that are mined on the communities? Is there any information?
To be honest with you on that one, I don't have a whole lot readily available at this time. Yeah.
Why is there such a difference with SREC credits, and what can Pennsylvania do to make that a better value for Pennsylvanians?
It's typically a byproduct of supply and demand. SRECs are something that's been created through state mandates as far as utilities requiring a certain percentage of their generation part of that portfolio must be from renewable energy sources. And so, let's say 10, 12 years ago, various states at different timelines started to designate, well, you don't have to go out and build a solar farm. You don't have to build a wind farm. You can meet this mandate by buying these renewable credits that are generated from existing solar arrays, for example, homeowners, business owners. For every megawatt hour, 1,000 kilowatt hours of solar energy that's produced is one credit that is then traded on an open market that these utilities then purchase to meet their mandate. As I said earlier, we only have a mandate of 0.5% of solar, so there's not much of a requirement here for that. In other states, there's bigger requirements. It's like I said, it's a case of supply and demand.
Pennsylvania could and should boost the AEPS requirements, those standards, from 0.5% to whatever would be better than 0.5%, and that would drive the price of SRECs up.